Omnipotent Youth Society is an act that I have been intensely intrigued by ever since I first started listening to them. They have released a total of 2 studio albums, which was the first self-titled Omnipotent Youth Society released in 2010, and then we also had their second album, which was titled Inside the Cable Temple, that was released in 2020. So it seems like they like 10-year intervals between album releases. Granted, they have also released 4 official single releases, with 2006's Not Omnipotent Comedy, 2013's A Tale of the Stormy Pawn Shop, 2015 with A Walk in the Woods of Southwestern Hebei, and then we've got 2016 with Zhangzhou. But we've got these 2 main albums that we are going to be checking out in this video, because in this video I intend on reviewing and ranking, critiquing and analyzing all of the tracks within these 2 albums. And I'm going to be giving them a score, an overall score based on the criteria I have. It's going to be a little bit different to the usual videos I do because I don't intend on playing each of these tracks in their entirety. I would rather simply listen to them in my own time and give you guys the summation of what I feel about these tracks. Because if you're not familiar with me, sup shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands, and welcome to this SB Discography video. I didn't know how to get that intro there in a way which is natural, as I'm not used to doing these videos, and it may be a little bit different for people who are expecting me again to listen through these tracks and through, but this is specifically if you're looking for a reaction video to this album, this is not it. It could potentially be a little bit drier than what you're used to, but I still think that if you're wanting someone to really dig into these tracks and try and understand them, that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, I should note, for anyone interested or curious, I myself personally, I will not be looking through the lyrics because I don't think it's necessarily fair for me to have, a clearer understanding of some languages over others and for that to allow the score to be affected by it. Granted, I am acutely aware that there is a member of Omnipotent Youth Society who does English translations for these tracks, and I'm utterly thankful for them for doing it. But just for these discography reviews, I want this track, I want it to be about the music. I'll grade the quality of the vocal performance and stuff like that, but I want this to sort of be taken from the perspective of how good is the overall sound, the music of it, the instruments, the vocal style. How much does it sort of tell you without you needing to understand the words verbatim? I think that's the only way I can really make this fair across all of the discographies I want to do, is after I do Omnipotent Youth Society, I'd like to do, David Tao, Jaicho, Fuji Kaze, Tokyo Incidents, Zhang Yuxing, and then also some Western acts. I'd love to do Metallica, I'd like to do sort of some middle acts like Trivium and Avenged Sevenfold and Bullet from Valentine. These are in a wide variety of languages, so I don't think that using the lyrics for the criteria is necessarily fair, but everything else will be included. I'm hoping by now I've put in a little slide to show what I'm going to be grading these tracks on. I'm going to be also featuring my notes that I've done for a bigger conclusion. I'm going to show the writing for it in the videos after each track, just so that you can read through it and pause the video and kind of get my thoughts on it. But I'm still going to endeavor to give a summary of how I feel about the track within it. I just don't want to necessarily give 2 different versions of the same thing, and I also understand that for a lot of people watching this video, there may be a language barrier, as I have a lot of people who watch this channel from overseas who don't necessarily speak English fluently. But with that really elongated introduction out of the way, I look forward to reviewing both of these studio albums from Omnipotent Youth Society. And if you enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe. It genuinely helps. This is the first big video that I've done in quite a while, and I'd like to do more of these, but I really, if you like and subscribe, it just helps me know. Even leave a comment as well, let me know what you think. It just lets me know that people are actually watching, and if there's anything I can improve on with these videos, if you can let me know, that'd be great. Anyways, I'm gonna get into it tomorrow night. I just thought I'd do the intro on the first night, and then I'll do the album the next and stuff like that. So there may be some delays between these videos, but I'm hoping that this is a good starter one. Nice and short in case anyone wants to go down the rabbit hole with these videos. I'll catch you tomorrow. But album number 1, stay cool shredders. See you then. Album number 1, Omnipotent Youth Society. Track number 1, The Hall of Dog's Urine. This is a really stunning intro track. I like the bluesy intonations there. The combination of the guitars, the bass, and drums was simply divine. It was nice to have an instrumental intro so that they could show their capabilities without having a story over top to give too much away. The post-production sounds dope, things are nice and polished, and I look forward to what we have next. Special shout out for that really big chaotic finish at the end, that was really stunning. Track number 2, the non-omnipotent comedy. This track features vocals for the first time, but it also features some really interesting phrasings from the brass and the woodwinds, alongside a really kick-ass guitar solo at the midpoint. And I'm just really stoked with the fullness of the composition in general, the articulate, innate, intricate layering. It's just really sensational, not just from like a compositional layering perspective, but also from a performing, because we had like those verse sections, but the lyrics were so sparse, It was really all about the different sections of the track that was almost through composed that we had. We almost had like a big ABA section going to this like kind of ska dubbish bit, then going back to the original theme there. It was just a really elegant realignment with our initial motif, and overall it shows a really fundamental understanding of both music theory and composition, as well as just a really great sense of style from this act. Track number 3, a heart-wrenching joke and a long daydream. Now, this track is especially important to me, as I've reviewed this album before in the past, but this is one of the tracks that I really intently remember from it. I just love the dreamy aesthetic of not only the vocal style, but also the way the woodwinds kind of sort of peter out and create this mistiness, this sense of the music surrounding you. It's very pretty. There's a lot of really fantastic, bright, charming harmonies there, interesting vocal phrasings there. There's lots of dynamic range in the recording as well. We're not squeezing everything to be the same loudness, which I actually appreciate. As it could be like, it's not great to have everything the same kind of like intensity. It gets a little bit overwhelming. I think this was more sort of a track that you kind of sit and chill with and vibe with. And again, it's an example of the power of having different lead instruments aside from the vocals, In the last track, we had like a really sort of fancy guitar solo at the halfway point, as well as more of a focus on some of the lower end, but also the brass, to be fair. Here it was mostly the woodwinds, and it added a different sort of aural aesthetic and vibe to it that made it memorable and distinct. Also, the vocal hook lines included in that last part at the end were just really catchy and memorable. Well done. Track number 4, Big Block Smashing on the Chest. This track, demonstrates that Omnipotent Youth Society are capable of writing odysseys, just these really fascinating long-length tracks here at 7 minutes, which is outside the length of a lot of music released nowadays. But what I really enjoy about Omnipotent Youth Society is that they manage to just flesh it out with so many wonderful ideas and concepts. There is a similarity to the bass lines and chord progressions, but it's the way that they phrase it with different instruments, such as the different ways they interpret the guitar riffs or the different brass parts there, with some parts being leads, others being on the sides, and like the harmonized guitars around that 5-minute mark coming into the it's just catchy all the way through. There are more somber elements there, and there are various changes in the way that it's meant to be emoted and heard. But overall, it's an absolute wonder of a journey that we're taken on from start to finish with absolutely no filler at all. And it's just incredibly well played. I have nothing but love for it. That's tremendous stuff. Track number 5, Summer Record of Foreign Birds. Now, this song, it's nice and short. It's an interlude, I assume, between the two halves of the album, which have some fairly... They're longer in duration, these pieces, so it's nice to have something a bit more bite-sized. What I think, though, is when I listen to this instrumental and I think of like the birds that I mentioned in the title, the way that the guitars flutter and there's lots of hammer-on and pull-off legato technique there does kind of sound a little bit like birds going through the sky. It does sound kind of summery. If anything, what I appreciate about these tracks is that they never get too dark and too ominous. It never becomes too overwhelming. There's always a sense of hope to the way that the music is portrayed and performed, and I really appreciate aesthetic in there. I'm looking forward to what we have next. Track number 6, Chin Huang Dao. Now, this track is a hell of an adventure. We go beyond the 7 to the 8 minutes. A phenomenal apex of the brass work instantiated earlier, coupled with the guitars, the bass, the drums, and everything like that. There are some really somber, moody, quiet, and soulful moments there with the guitars by themselves. Lots of space within this track, which is juxtaposed to the incredible force of when that brass bow, 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 and the guitars, everything comes in, the whole band, coming back down again after that dynamic lift with the verse. Phenomenal dynamic range within this track. The performance is top tier and it's absolutely stellar. This is probably one of my favorite tracks off of the album. I think that the way it's sung is very wholesome and very authentic and very raw. You can hear when like they come together at like the 5 to 6 minute. Like there's a part where they all come together and they kind of go out of tune a little bit with their harmonies. But it's because they're all crying out and that's not meant to sound perfectly tuneful, you know. I think that's wonderful. The intensity there, the furor is spicy. But in all honesty, I cannot think of a way they could have really improved upon this. I think this is why it got a higher score. Although to be fair, a lot of the stuff on this album got a high score. It's just that their music is so damn good. Track number 7, 100,000 Hippies. Now this song is another one that I remember fondly. It's the vocal melody that when I think of Omnipotent Youth Society, I kind of imagine the da 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 da. Like the singer of this band is so capable and adept at creating such memorable melodic passages for the words that they sing. It's not just that though that makes the song really special. I love the random kind of call and response, almost unison bends to what the brass is doing. There is such a sweetness to the slow dance kind of aesthetic that this track has with the way that the guitars and bass and all that simmer together with a really wistful brass. But there's other parts where like it becomes a lot stronger and more energetic and those contrast each other. It's a really interesting track, and I almost think that the post-rock kind of scarish, dubbish kind of infusions there with like the general, it's very, very captivating. I don't necessarily think we could have done more with this theme than what we did, but knowing the fact that they've made longer tracks than this, I'm sure they could have thought of something and just decided to keep it the way it was. So well done to them. Great track. Track number 8, All the Pubs on This Planet. Now, if I'm honest with you, while I appreciate the instrumental performance and I appreciate the vocals when we had them, and I appreciate some of the sound design, such as the psychedelic bit near the end where things get all warbly and stuff like that, and I like the overall, how the song made, how the song sounds, how do I describe it? It's like inoffensive and relatively palatable and everything like that. I don't really know if I necessarily connected with it that I did in the rest of the other tracks. This almost seemed like more of a show of their instrumental prowess, where I can appreciate what they're able to do on their instruments, but they've already shown us a lot of this earlier, so it's almost like it's a tribute to a lot of the bands that start in pubs and smaller venues and stuff like that, in which case I think it's very fitting. I'm wondering if there was some improvisation going on here. I mean, either way, that's not me saying it was badly played, by the way. I'm just saying like it would make sense for this to be a longer form track where they just kind of like riffed off of each other and had fun in that studio environment. I think it's a well-written track, and to their credit, it's very difficult to get a song this length and make it sound, I don't know, somewhat reasonable. But I don't think there was any filler, and I'm kind of glad that they had a chance to sort of spread their wings and flex a little bit on us before the final piece. Track number 9, Kill That Man from Shijiazhuang. Now, this is my favorite track off of the album. That said, I think there's so much strong material on this album that I'm not really sure if that is the case at this specific point. I'm going to talk about this album in general more in the conclusion, but this track I still think is absolutely incredible. It's an incredibly strongly written piece that makes the most of its real estate at 5 minutes 44, with a wonderful array of different sections that showcase the tenacity, the expertise, just the professional, they're commercial grade in their respective genre. This is a band that deserves a career because you can clearly hear the amount of work they've put into not only the fundamentals of music theory and composition, but the character and the expression when they play, the wide variety of different guitar leads and chord progressions, the drum chops as well when the drums come in. And it's the fact that the instruments don't just all come in at once. It's that we start with that really kind of timid little guitar, sort of like a double-tracked part at the beginning where it's nice and pretty with those arpeggios, the vocals, and then the strings make a return. Then you got the bass and the drums and the brass, and it's wonderful. All the fan favorites are there. And I think what kind of elevates it is just that extra intensity, that vocal oomph there at the end. With a lot of this album, the vocalist, the singer, has been relatively kind of balanced and very kind of conservative. But the scream that we have before that guitar solo at the end is just that little bit of extra heat I needed to really have it sell me. It's almost like we're able to tolerate everything up until that point, all the things that we discussed, and I kind of appreciate that we let that happen at the end as a climax. While I think I gave this one like an 8.39 out of 10, what you need to understand is it's simply just, at that level, it's just getting purely subjective. 8.39 out of 10 for me is incredibly high. I'm not sure what it would need to do to get a 9 or a 10. It would just need to, I would have to revisit it, and honestly the fact that it's not a 9 is making me sort of like double check my marking gradient already in this very first discography video. But nonetheless, it's an incredible track and they ought to be proud of themselves. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this first album from an act named Omnipotent Youth Society, titled Omnipotent Youth Society. I've spoken about the tracks, both, a relatively minimal conclusion on each, I suppose, with the ranking and the added details within each of the tracks. So if you missed any, feel free to go back in the review and check them out if you're missing your favorite track or you've come in halfway. But effectively, what I love about this band is just how completely damn near flawless their first album is. When I give again the point system that I have with these, it's simply, I think 9s and 10s are basically very subjective. I think that if you get above an 8, you're doing pretty well. While I maintain that if I give an album a 1, it's because it's barely music, it's just absolutely terrible and abhorrent. There is room for a 1. I think it's worth noting in future for the rest of these discography videos that 8 is commercial grade. And beyond that, getting to like 8.5s, it's a really special track. I think in general this album is an example of their vocal abilities, their instrumental proficiency, the way they know how to string different verse and chorus sections together, as well as different interesting instrumental parts there. The fact they included interludes when they knew they had longer tracks was just indicative of the fact they were aware that the audience, if they're listening to this from start to finish, will need a break there. And I can only imagine that if you understand the language, it is incredibly heavy. It is probably so much more meaningful, and while I kind of at this point regret not including lyrics as part of the grading for these reviews, at the same time I am nonetheless thankful, because it just wouldn't have been fair if I had lyrics for each musician I reviewed and they weren't equally translated. It just wouldn't have been fair. So I think that for anyone who can understand this natively, congratulations, you're having a far more intimate experience than I am, and I mean that sincerely, and I'm happy for you. I think the only thing that would basically make this music better for me would be for it to for me to understand it natively. With that said, I'm not going to allow the lyrics to go into the grading for the English-speaking stuff, but for this album specifically, just a really impressive first effort. It's damn near flawless. The only thing I could really pick out that kind of bugged me was like the lead guitar in Kill the Man from Shizhua Shuang. It was just a little bit loud on the left, but that's like the only thing. If anything, there were tracks such as All the Pubs on This Planet where I didn't necessarily feel personally affected by it, simply because I just think it was a little bit too long with their showing their capacity for stringing ideas together whilst that has already been established. I think it's more of a them song than a me song, although again that could be coming I don't think it was necessarily beneficial for the listener to have that in there. It was more of a song I wanted to put forward. If I'm completely honest, I'm not for a second thinking that anyone should be writing music for the listener or for me, because then you're not really, I think there's a really big issue with authenticity there, with creativity, if you're making music for other people. But nonetheless, that's the only issue with the lead guitar. Everything else was damn near flawless. They're clearly marvelous musicians who are phenomenally skilled and talented, and this was a very, very good effort. And the post-production was wonderful. It was commercial grade. There's a great sense of warmth to it. It doesn't sound sterilized or overproduced. The leveling in general was really good. There was even some automation panning and stuff, as well as some sort of like panning with the delays and such like that. Different things were positioned at different parts of the frequency spectrum as well, known as stereo field. And there was even filtering of some parts to make some kind of sound sort of warbly and psychedelic. The post-production was on point. And I haven't really spoken about the vocals much beyond simply saying, but the vocalist had tremendous head and chest voice, had great approach to it, great personality, a sense of real kind of calmness and level-headedness that allowed for some of the more raunchy parts of this album to kind of remain kind of instead. Again, we let go in that last track, but otherwise I just think it's damn near, it's very good. So the thing about having a really incredible first album like this is that it allows me to feel really excited for what the second album. So let's go check that out tomorrow. Album number 2, Inside the Cable Temple. Track number 1, Morning. I had a fantastic time with the start of this. It's very different to the previous album, where we had those kind of bluesy rock, kind of almost grunge-ish sort of tones there. This was almost like you could imagine yourself waking up in the morning while listening to it. It's clear from the outset that this is going to be a different experience with the folks on the saxophones, the trumpets, and the rest of the brass there, and I'm interested to see how much more of that we're going to have in the tracks to come. Track 2, Muddy River. So from the first unconventional, uncertain guitar strum, you just have an enigma of a piece. Like, this showcases the 10 years they've spent sharpening their skill set. It's just wonderful. These are damn near flawless compositions. There's a lot of phenomenal performances across a wide range of different instruments. In fact, I think I'm tempted to give it the performance a 9. I'm doing the point scoring for these as well. Already these tracks, I think this album is going to potentially score higher than the first, even though I have a fondness for the original. But just, the vocalist's voice comes in, very familiar, similar style to what we had before. We're fairly comfortable in our range, but a lot of beauty of this track comes not just from the wide variety of different instruments within the mix, how they're interpreted and performed and how they're articulated. It's also just the way that we switch between moods and segs, and I think that there's like an extra bit of enjoyment which comes from being able to understand a language natively, as I mentioned before. It's just tremendous. It's a tremendous, I don't know how they managed to get all of those different parts coalescing, amalgamating, coming in from the left and then something else on the right. There's unison between different sort of string sections or brass parts. The guitars have the wow, the kind of slide up and down the neck going into it, but the bass and drums just so tight as well. It seems like a bigger project from Omnipotent this side round. Muddy River, a fantastic track at a longer form factor than the previous intro track. I'm looking again, it's really positive so far. But in the post-production before I go to the next track is marvelous. I adore it to pieces. Track number 3, Cloud of Equality. Now, I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about this track. I think that in regards to what it is a standalone piece, a shorter one after the Muddy River. I think I would need to understand the context of the lyrics to really be able to appreciate why it's being placed here. If without understanding the lyrics, I'm supposing it's more of a response to what we were discussing in Muddy River. Maybe it's hinting at what is going to come in future. The use of the occasional guitars in the center as well as on the right, that weird warble with some kind of wing, kind of weird kind of oscillate. I don't know what that instrument is. They're fascinating tones, and that's why I'm quite happy with the production quality for it. I think that it sounds great. It's just that I can't necessarily pick whether I should feel enamored by it or not. I think it's a little bit kind of creepy, like it's almost struggling, and I think if that's the inference, they've succeeded. Not that the band is struggling, but I mean, it sounds like someone is struggling with the way that the guitars sound, like something's crying out in the center. It's very quiet. If that's what they're going for, then they've nailed it, the aesthetic right there. Still, I think more than anything, it's quite intriguing, and I'm hoping we get some clarification on why that was there with the next track. Track number 4, Quarrying. Now, this track was a little bit surprising to me, as a lot of you who may have already listened to this are probably aware. I wasn't expecting the end to occur. A lot of what I want to say again is on the screen right now in the form of the written part, which I think will be over there in the review. But if I was to sort of give my 2 cents just after the experience, I think my favorite thing about this track is not just that there was the keys. The piano solo was a personal highlight for me. I thought we haven't really had the piano yet, if I'm not mistaken. They haven't really been like a focal point in any of the previous tracks. I could be wrong. Please let me know if I am. I think the last album was mostly sort of strings and brass and drums and guitar and bass, right? With vocals. And other sort of maybe synth parts occasionally, but they're definitely exploring a wider range of different options in this one. I just think it's not just the piano, but also just the way it started getting a bit more demented and twisted with the post-production. I initially was giving it like, the production's like an 8, like a solid 8 out of 10. And a lot of people, I can imagine, might be put off by the way that it sounds near the end, because it is very kind of loud and kind of over the top. But I actually kind of adore that, and from my experience having done sort of studio production and engineering and stuff, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to kind of imply the sound you want whilst playing it alongside the music, to manipulate a recorded performance and then add to it in a way where it kind of makes you kind of realize what the track is about, even if there is no lyrics behind it. Like, you could tell it was an explosion from like the quarrying, right? And I think there, I didn't need to understand the vocals, what they were saying, to kind of imply that with the chaos of the different brass and piano parts, that the explosions were definitely not good. So it makes me wonder whether this is about a place that went through some mining or something like that. And that is an example of the music telling me the story. And that is a successful track, which is why this got a 9 for performance and a 9 for production. And just in regards to the main theme, I'd probably give that, yeah, no, I'm happy with that. This is probably my favorite track off of the album so far, to be fair. Track number 5, Chickadee. Now, I'd already reviewed this, I think, as maybe through a fan request live stream or something like that. This track, I think, is meant to be more of a single. It features a lot of really elegant inclusions with, you know, the guitar focus being there as well as the vocals, but then you also had the wonderful reintroduction of those woodwinds, like the flute solos and stuff like that. The post-production, as per the rest of the album, is utterly stellar, and everything is just so warm and nicely tucked in and neat there. It was nice to have a bit of extra oomph with the vocal performance as well, a bit of vocal fry there, as well as coming in on the sides, which is why I think I gave that more points or high score than I did for the other tracks, just to kind of like just push things a little bit, even though I know we're very comfortable in our range and it sounds great. I think all in all, though, especially when you've got a lot of the previous two tracks at almost 9 minutes and almost 6 minutes respectively, it's nice to have a shorter piece outside of the mid sections. I understand this is probably a concept album for Omnipotent Youth Society, but it's just nice to have something a little bit sort of more bite-sized to show that we can compact our concepts into there as well. It's really great stuff, and I don't think there was a note out of place. Track number 6, Detour. Now, this track was interesting. As I understand it, it was an instrumental, in case I missed any vocal parts there. We had a nice little kind of layover going from the previous track into this one with the dun-dun that was really sort of catchy, that catchy main theme. It didn't necessarily pull me in. I think what I kind of like about these tracks is when we do have the singer there kind of guiding us along with their really soothing voice, harmonizing effortlessly with everything else in existence. I think, though, it was nice to have I'm kind of like a prog rockish going to the swing. We had A, B going backwards and forwards with different brass solo sections there, with the guitars on the sides asking questions along the way. The drums were absolutely on point, top notch with the percussion, same with the bass there. It was nice to develop those instrumental layers at the start smoothly within segs of like 4 bars. The post-production was dope. The performance was incredibly sophisticated. And yeah, I kind of expect this level from these guys now, from Omnipotent Youth Society, and I feel like I've been spoiled. Track number 7, Hebe Mochi Lin, if I'm not mispronouncing that. This song, like, it was starting to really affect me whilst I was listening to it. I was really sure how to really cope with the screaming at the end. It was such a roller coaster, a massive journey. I would thoroughly recommend, if you have not listened to this track, let alone any of the other stuff within this album, that this is probably going to be the big one for me. Like, this is the highest rated track I've given in a long time. It's like an 8.7 or something like that. It's damn close to 10. Damn close to 9 even. Affected me in a way where I think if I was less confused, it would have been even higher. It was more that I think the thing that I'm missing there is a clarification on why there is the screaming. That's probably partly because I'm ignorant about where the source of this is coming from. If that is to do with the explosions and stuff like that we had earlier, maybe that is the case. There was so much to talk about in this with the different instrumental solos we had, like guitars. The vocals were doing some fun stuff where they were harmonized, and then they had like an extra kind of wail there and stuff like that, which is kind of an interesting way to approach it. Just a flurry of different rhythms and chord progressions and harmonies and chromaticisms and accidentals, and a wide, it's basically damn near flawless. This music, this is the epitome of progressive rock for me. They This was probably one of the most, if not the most experimental track they've released as of this point in time. And they are nailing it. They had this wonderful concept within this track alone at 11:28 that thoroughly justified the length of it. You know, there was no filler. I didn't even notice that 11:28 minutes pass. It was like you're at a show and you go in and then you're out the next minute or the next second and you're like, what happened? And I think that this is what every composer should aspire to, is to be able to write music as well as this. Not necessarily that you need to write progressive rock or whatever, but I think you need to be able to get yourself to a point as a songwriter where people are not questioning or looking at their watches. They're sitting there mesmerized by the just complete and utter show of force there, of expertise across everything involved. Phenomenal piece of music. They ought to be very proud of themselves. Track 8, Cable Temple. This was such a beautiful song. I am floored by it. It's the only time I've ever given a track a 9.5 in the feels department. How it made me feel. There was just something so soothing about it, and so caring and wonderful and warm. I just was that end part where you hear the little bottles jingling and stuff like that. It's just wonderful atmosphere to it, but just it ends so sweetly. I thought they were going to end on the minor, but then they end on the major and you hear that crescendo with the strings and brah, and then you're done. It's such a fun, like a through composed track with that similar, simple-ish kind of accessible kind of chord progression. For it to last 9 minutes is indicative of just how incredibly phenomenal this act is. And it makes me wonder what they went through with that previous track. Because of the screaming, I'm wondering if this is talking about it in post. It's an amazing album. It's an utterly flawless album. I recommend everyone listen to this album. Listen to the first album from Omnipotent, but please listen to this second one. They've outdone themselves. This track is it was less complicated instrumentally in regards to the performance than the previous ones, but it was just such a sweet outro track that showcased when they go minimalist, it works. And the post-production is the icing on the cake. Excellent stuff. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album, Inside the Cable Temple, from Omnipotent Youth Society. I'm still a little bit elevated after how that last track finished. I think this was a tremendous album. It showcased the just a wonderful vocal timbre, the approach to it that we have had. It was a lot more gentle in this one though, like apart from the screams and stuff like that in the seventh song, but like typically this track was just so softly, smoothly spoken with the stories there. I don't know what the stories are, but you kind of get an impression from what the music tells you and what you hear from the way the vocalist emotes. And holy crap, there's some heavy stuff going on in this album, but just the power of it. The power of the vocal performance with the harmonies and various sort of bits of vocal technique, phenomenal. Again, continued phenomenal control of head and chest voice there. Absolutely no complaints. We've got our voice has aged like fine wine. We've just found a little bit more polish on what we had initially, and there were some nines in there from the vocals in this album as well, just because of an extra bit of oomph and spice and zazz to it. Wonderful. The tracks, whether they were like a minute 23 or like 11 and a half minutes, were absolutely spectacular for the most part. I think the third track, I didn't necessarily figure it out until the fourth song, where I put in the notes there. I didn't mention this at the time, but there was like a ding in the fourth track where like, oh, that was the sound from the previous track. In the same way that you had like bottles kind of carry over from other ones, and you had like a track before had the guitar going into detour and stuff like that. There were conscious efforts by Omnipotent Youth Society, not just to have the tracks themselves be their own sort of concept and their own thing to enjoy, but to try and get the listener to go through them as a whole experience. And that is the X factor. That is more than what I would expect or appreciate from a lot of musicians and bands nowadays. But Omnipotent Youth Society, it just absolute pros at it. I am so blown away, not just by how well these tracks are structured, regardless of whether they're short little concepts or big elongated sort of rolling on maybe one or two ideas, but just keep the whole time just reinvented with a plethora of different instruments. Like, we thought we had a lot of instruments in the previous track. Oh boy, like the use of, I don't know if we had saxophones and pianos in the last album. Forgive me if we did. But we just had so many different ingredients across the board in this album. And we knew exactly where to niche and put each respective part so that it made the most sense instrumentally, harmonically, melodically, rhythmically, etc. I adore the fact that we had some tracks, such as the last one, where it was just the guy and the guitars, maybe some strings on the side, and other times it was just massive, just tremendous tour de force. There was no weak performance. Everyone knew how to play their parts. There was beyond, I say, fundamentals of music theory and composition with the way things were played. Beyond that, it's masterful. I want to talk about a few of the instruments really quickly that I appreciated within this. I appreciated the key solo that we had. Yeah, quarrying, that piano solo that we had there, I think. Yeah, the key solo, that was tremendous. We didn't just introduce a new instrument we might not necessarily had before in previous elements. We blew the listener away with it. I mean, the guitars, bass, drums were on point, and the previous comments I made about their work and the other albums stand here. There was more of the phenomenal, incredible goodness. In the same way that when the strings came in, they had a wonderful sort of legato flow to it, but there was also plucking in parts there. We expressed ourselves appropriately for the phrasing that we needed, the emotional emphasis there for certain parts, paying attention to kind of coexist within the dynamic range both for and against it, because sometimes there were just loud sounds that came in and just smashed the crap out of your headphones in a way, which to me makes sense, but might be a little bit off-putting to some people wanting a more sort of measured experience. You're not getting this here. It's experimental. It's meant to be, it doesn't need to be clean and perfect. And by that I mean, like, music doesn't need to sound pleasant in order to be good. The percussion was phenomenal. Really incredible display of, the four main rhythms, quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths, plus ghost notes, different fill parts, wonderful cymbal work. The guitars, as I mentioned, like with the various, there were some guitar solos in here, but also just the strumming. The strumming was enough. And the bass playing was tremendous in that low and nice. We didn't just explore the root notes, we had like double bass sections, and then we also had like walking bass parts and stuff like that. We explored the scales and modes, and we weren't just constricted to one part. We knew how to move around. There were these wonderful call and responses between like brass or like saxophone or strings or guitar and like all these other elements. And I think there was like a track in the previous album, if I'm not mistaken. It was like all the pubs on this planet where like it sounded like a jam track or an improvisation track. And I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of that because I didn't necessarily know how to add it to the music apart from to show us they could play. There was no piece in this album whatsoever where, no matter how incredibly technical or complicated it got, I felt alienated by it. It always sounded like it served the needs of the tunes that we had present. It's just really, like, I am blown away, utterly blown away by the songwriting as well. Just how did we write this? It must have taken 10 years to figure this out. Omnipotent Youth Society, if you're watching this, take all the time you need for the third album if you make one. We'll wait till 2030, because if it's at this level or even better than it, we will wait. We will be patient. This is like a must-listen album as far as I'm concerned. It's just whether they're sort of simple, more sort of more chilled out kind of tracks, not chilled out as in like more sort of bite-sized pieces like Detour and Chickadee, or like again they're like Hey Bei Mochi Lin, which is like 11.5 minutes. You're not going to be bored or disinterested or disappointed. Even if you don't understand the language, you're still going to be able to appreciate and enjoy it. Yeah, my points stand that I made throughout each of the tracks, whether they were short or long, there's just incredible pieces of work. The studio post-production, that was a thing for me that really did sparkle in this. I think that in the previous album, we did play around with sort of sound effects, and we did mess around with like warping tones and kind of making them kind of messy and noisy and stuff like that for the sake of purpose of the aesthetic of it, right? In this track, we did not just attempt to do that again, we fully committed. The quarrying, where it sounded like there was an explosion, was just unreal. And then Hey Bei, where like there were the screams and they were kind of crawling over each other on the sides, it just sounded like we were inside a mine collapsing or something like that. It was horrific. It was genuinely distressing. That's the power of combining really phenomenally written and performed music with with Foley and extra samples and using the stereo field and making it three-dimensional, and just neat, whilst also being commercial grade with the studio production, because I think it was a cleaner overall tone to this recording as well. It didn't sound over-engineered, but the vocals, the bass, guitars, drums, strings, brass, woodwinds, everything, keys, everything in here, even the Foley-ish bits or the overdubs, they all sounded clean. There was only like one bit where I was like, why is like the ukulele that far to the side? But even then, and there were like some parts where I was like, do those guitars, it's like, even if there was a part I didn't necessarily like about the way a part was written, like the harmonized guitars at one point, with Hey Bei Mo Chi Lin, like I wasn't sure about the harmonized guitars, but then they resolved. There's tension that gets resolved. It's just it's a wonderfully produced. Whoever did the studio production on it deserves a medal, and they just nailed it. It's a phenomenal amount of dynamic range, difference between the quiet and louds. The vocals sounded so sincere and pure, and they didn't sound exaggerated or overproduced. They were full sounding and meticulous. The recording was just a phenomenal capture across the board with a great chemistry between the musicians involved. And it was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limiting was handled. I think at this point, the second album has got a higher score than the first overall, but I just want to say before we go into the final conclusion and before I go and review my notes tomorrow, these are both fantastic albums, and I just want to thank you all watching this for recommending that I listen to these guys in the first place, because without you watching this, without you recommending musicians like this, I wouldn't know, and I'd be a lot worse off without it. Is that the way to say it? I would be missing out. Let's just say that. I am so glad that I get to listen to music like this. So yeah, catch you tomorrow in the conclusion for the overall discography review. See you then. And sup shredders, today is the final day of me recording this album discography review. We've done 2 albums, both of the studio albums from Omnipotent Youth Society, released in 2010 and 2020 respectively. The first being Omnipotent Youth Society, and the other, more recent one, being Inside the Cable Temple. Now, I'm going to put the rankings here in a moment. I'm going to go small, I'm going to put them on that side, but I just want you to know, before we go into it, that after thinking about both of these albums over the last little while, I'm just really stoked that I had the opportunity to listen through them, and I just want to thank you all of you who suggested that I check these guys out. I want to thank you for getting me to do this, because it was a pleasure to listen through all this music, even if there were some moments which were very emotionally charged. I think that's what music is supposed to do. It's supposed to sort of reach out to you with an open hand and invite you to take a journey with it, and I think that's definitely what Omnipotent Youth Society do. Now, I made myself small here. The rankings will be here. There are a total of 17 tracks, if I'm not mistaken. The discography overall got a rating of around 8.3 out of 10, and while that may not seem that high, it's a really good score. It's also worth noting that the second album, the more recent one, scored more highly than the original one. That is not to say that I didn't actually appreciate a lot of the tracks within the initial, like, if I have a look through it really quickly, Kill That Man from Xizhua Shuang, Xizhua Huang. It's a hard word for me to say, I promise I'm working on it. But that track stuck with me, as well as, tracks like 100,000 Hippies and Qing Huang Dao. But it's also tracks from Inside the Cable Temple, such as Hey Bei Mo Chi Lin, which was the highest ranked song for today, but out of the entire discography for me. That was an absolute masterpiece, an absolute masterclass across the entire eras without doing another entire conclusion again. I think even the tracks which I didn't necessarily enjoy as much, such as, there was one track in particular off of Inside the Cable Temple. It was, it was Cloud of Equality. It was simply because I could appreciate everything going apart from like the direction that we were going thematically with it. I couldn't figure out why the sounds were occurring. That doesn't mean it's a bad song necessarily, and I think the work that went into it is tremendous. And I think, if I could go back and retrospectively, give a higher score to it, I would. It's just I give these scores based on my listening journey on that first impression. So yeah, but overall just a very sort of satisfying discography. I look forward to doing a lot more than these, or a lot more of these, should I say. And let me know what you think of these rankings. Again, To emphasize, I am ranking these on the quality of the vocal performance, the main theme, rhythms, the coloration, like the harmonies and everything like that, harmonies and melodies and how they interact, the structure of it, how it was all put together, the ornamentation, the various sort of fancy stuff to extra techniques and stuff to kind of sass it up, the actual performance itself, so how well was it performed, the production quality, studio time and everything like that, and how that all sounds, and how it made me feel in respect to what I was getting from the music and how it affected me. Because I firmly believe that all music should make you feel something. And if music is making you feel ambivalent or indifferent, to me, I think it's failed. Unless there was a specific purpose of it. But what's the point of making art if it doesn't affect you, right? Or if it doesn't affect another person? But that's, of course, I'm sure there'll be people that disagree with that, as well as the scores I've given these tracks. So feel free to, let me know in the comments what you think. Again, just to iterate, the next discography is probably going to be Zhang Yuxing, which is much more considerable of a task. But I hope to get that done before Christmas. We'll see. It's a lot of work. This album discography review has been a lot more work than I thought it was. But ultimately, it was satisfying. I'm keen to do more. So, again, like and subscribe if you want to see more. And please, just before we finish, thank you for watching this album discography review of Omnipotent Youth Society. And hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go check out Omnipotent Youth Society's various social medias and a Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as either hell more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next discography review. Spiderhands out.